Well, thank you, everybody, again for participating in that. It's been um, really useful as an exercise, and I'm sure that those who come to watch this will find it certainly interesting, if not actually insightful, into the process. The exercise, as I had envisaged it, was quite ambitious for a number of reasons, not least because when one does apply for pupillage, it's normally for a specific set of chambers and a specific practice area. That was why when I asked all of you to kindly participate, I was trying to get a broad section of disciplines, so that although for the purposes of the interview we found it difficult to construct a way to focus it on a specific practice area or multiple practice areas, for the benefit of those watching this while the panel is still constituted, to ask you as individuals, as representatives of your practice areas, how a hypothetical third section of an interview, which in reality is probably what would happen, because in the instance we've just had Roshan do a sort of ad hoc advocacy exercise and then some competency questions, and then probably he would be asked either some off-the-cuff legal questions in relation to the pupillage he was applying for, or possibly even to present or answer questions on an exercise he'd been given in advance. So we haven't done that for practical reasons, and we may look to do that in another series. But I'm going to ask you in a moment. I appreciate that Ruth, Paul, and Laura, the three of you are all criminal practitioners. So we'll try and put that together. If we start with James, though, James, in your experience, how would the sort of practice-specific area aspect of an interview at a public law set go, or be different?
Yeah, so my specialism is planning and environmental and some public law stuff. So I guess it would be a lot more context specific. And so we'd be looking at whether people really kind of have an understanding of the different values and dynamics that there are within that area of law. So if you take planning, for example, it's quite political, it can be quite regional, it involves lots of different layers. You've got the members of the public, you've got the public authorities, the regulators, the developers, the environmental lobbyists, all sorts. So there'd be some kind of something around trying to just understand what kind of understanding people have for the way that system works, not in a technical sense, but in a kind of human sense. So that's one thing. The second thing is, because we're pretty specialist, we're always looking to understand really whether people are interested in that specialization, and if they say they are, why they say they are. So we'll look at things like work experience. Have they done many pupillages in those kinds of sets? Have they got other outside experiences that kind of resonate with that? But we're very keen to really look for the people who have some fire in them about the particular area of law that we're in. Otherwise, I'd say that along with it's quite a commercial practice, so the standards are quite high. But what I would say to people is, certainly once you get through the door to interview, don't be concerned too much if you think that your CV is weak on qualifications, because you've got to have a reason for that if you haven't done so well. But really, when it comes to interview, we're really looking for potential and how engaging you are. And very often we find that the people who have the starred first and so on are not necessarily the most engaging people. There are some who have the theory that actually that it's inversely proportional. So often it's the people who aren't quite so good on paper who are actually the more engaging candidates. And for me certainly, potential. What's this person, yes, what are they like now, but really, what are they going to be like at the end of pupillage and in 5 years' time when they cut their teeth a bit more at the bar? What's the material we've got to work with? That's really important.
So thanks for that, James. I'm just going to quickly tag on to the back of that in relation to commercial work and international disputes that I do. I think that everything James has said is right. It isn't always the people with the highest class or highest degree classification that are the best. It's an indicator, and frankly, not much more than that. In terms of what we do, we will almost always give applicants a couple of recent relevant cases in advance, and we'll be asking them specific pointed questions about their interpretation of what some of the judges have done. We might ask them to apply it to hypothetical questions that they're given in interview, hypothetical scenarios. And again, it's a measure of being able to understand how they apply things. It isn't necessarily about getting the right answer. It may even be a situation where the right answer isn't clear. It's about them demonstrating an ability to think through a legal problem and show some of the core competencies that we can build on. The second aspect for me, and one of the things that's quite important in an aspiring commercial lawyer, is that broad sense of commerciality. Again, I think that's something, to be fair, that James was touching on, because yes, understanding how contract law works is very important, but having a nose for how business works, what motivates people, and why certain things may have happened in a particular factual pattern is enormously important in a commercial lawyer. And one might not expect to see that at such an early stage, but you can certainly see glimmers of it. And I think that's very, very useful as a barometer of their potential. On general civil, I'll ask Francis and Vinesh, both of whom are professional colleagues of mine. Francis first, on civil, sort of general civil practice in general.
Well, my experience of pupillage recruitment has been into a general common law set. So we were recruiting in more general terms. What I would say from my experience of reading application forms and seeing candidates at interview is that we obviously go through pupillage season, don't we? And lots of candidates applying for lots of pupillages. And candidates really need to ensure that they tailor their application to the set that they're applying to, because particularly where we see similar sorts of questions, the sort of, why do you want to practice at this set? Why do you want to practice in these practice areas? And a cut and paste just isn't good enough. And it shows a lack of preparation. So those sorts of issues of why you want to practice in a particular area, I think are really important, and the sort of thing that perhaps sometimes doesn't get wheeled out on the application form sift, but you can be really punished for an interview if you get it wrong, in my experience.
Vinesh, as somebody who's just come through it very recently, anything you'd add?
I'd agree with pretty much everything that Francis has said. I mean, it's incredibly important that an application is rooted to the area that you wish to practice. Having gone through the process fairly recently, I think the issue sometimes is that someone can be quite uncertain as to which area they do want to practice. And so I think sometimes even demonstrating that you are prepared to or would like to try other areas might assist, but I suppose that's a judgment call for the set, and obviously you're an academic profile, professional background, etc. But those who are considering civil specially, the only other advice I'd give is perhaps look at the recent cases on Bailey, the recent Court of Appeal decisions, etc., because undoubtedly there will be a raft of civil case law that's come out. That will be a hot topic that will be discussed during pupillage interviews. But also the judgment's given an insight into how civil works, and civil is certainly procedurally is about the white book, and how you interpret the relevant rules of the CPR. So all I'd add is try and get a grounding of that, though I can appreciate people are at various different stages of their academic career. Right, yeah, try and get a grounding in that prior to going into an interview.
Great, thanks, thanks Vinesh, and thanks incidentally for playing the pupillage applicant so convincingly. To point out, you do actually have a practicing certificate now. things have moved on. Natasha, from a family law perspective.
In respect to family law, it's I would recommend to applicants to look at current family law related developments. So, for example, the divorce bill and other things that happen in the future. To know the important family law judgments that have come out recently, such as Supreme Court, Court of Appeal judgments or significant High Court decisions. Family Law Week is really good at putting in lots of updates on that. I think often in pupillage interviews generally, you may get an ethics question. I know when I went through it myself as a wannabe barrister, I actually applied to a mixed set with a criminal focus, and we definitely had some ethics questions there. However, in the family law context, the ethics questions may be put into a family scenario. So you really need to know your ethics and be able to apply it to whatever situation is presented to you. One thing that's important as a family practitioner is the fact that we're going to be dealing with people at one of the most difficult times in their lives. Our clients can be highly stressed and emotional and worried. You're going to be dealing with some of their most intimate and private and also important parts of their lives. As such, you need to be a good people person. So your personality is important when it comes to an interview. You need to be able to show empathy and guide individuals through the process. So if you've had any experience of having to deal with people in highly stressful situations, the interview may be a good opportunity for you to shine that out further past your application form. We're also dealing with lots of people from different backgrounds and cultures, and also vulnerable clients who may be vulnerable due to a learning disability, physical disability, mental health issues, drug-related issues and other things on a day-to-day basis, which is also quite similar to crime. So you need to be able to work with them, explain things to them in a way that they will understand, and work with others. So for example, intermediaries and people like that at court. If you have any experience of dealing with anybody outlined above, then it's the interview is a good stage for you to shine that.
Excellent. And just very briefly, Natasha, is there anything in a family pupillage interview which is different? Is there an exercise that's normally conducted or something like that? Or
sometimes people can be asked to do presentations, for example. I know when I was back in my application stage, because I wasn't applying to a pure family law set, I didn't have to, but I did speak to some other people before doing the Zoom talk, and they did say that they had to do presentations, as opposed to when I was doing a criminal pupillage, and that was more of a plea mitigation or what's the thing, bail application, that's it. Yeah.
okay. Well, can I suggest if Paul, you want to go first, and then hand over to Laura and Ruth in succession for crime.
Well, crime is not so different in the sense that all I'm looking for is really two things: intellect, which has been demonstrated. James's point that if you've got through to being interviewed for 2 places out of 300 applicants, that should have been demonstrated. But that's not the most important thing I look for. But I do look for sort of not pure intellect, but an ability to react and argue intelligently. And so when I asked the applicant, when I made that interjection, he batted it off and moved on. I wouldn't have let that go in an interview. I'd have said, well, hang on a second, you haven't answered my question yet. And not in an aggressive way, but to get a conversation going, to see whether he could feel his way to the answer, which seemed to me the answer was, well, just because everybody does something doesn't mean that their rights aren't being, or an individual's rights aren't being curtailed. So we do a lot of that, and I think that's a good thing. I think it puts people at their ease rather than sort of lazy questions like, why do you want to be a barrister, that sort of thing. And the other thing is that I'm all the while thinking, how persuasive is this person going to be in due course? Not the finished article, but there are some people who are just never going to be able to persuade you of anything. Perhaps I put that rather bluntly, but it's not about being posh. It's just somebody who you can imagine just listening to and thinking, yeah, I know, I can imagine you convincing me of something. And I think on that point, people get very nervous in interviews, and I was terrible at interviews, and I make sure we put the applicants at ease. And I would recommend that anybody does interview practice, so go and see a practitioner. The Inns run schemes, mine, Grays do which I participate in, where you can get hours of free mock interview practice, especially if you're not good at interviews. And if I was applying now, I'm not good at them. I would use as much of that as possible, because you don't. And I would video them occasionally with an iPhone, because sometimes you don't realise that you're talking too quickly, or that you and too much, and and all that stuff is easily fixed. So those are my observations.
Just jump in there for a second to point out that actually Paul was one of my mentors back in the day, and Paul mock interviewed me, and in fact the following year I actually did pupillage Paul's set, having convinced the panel, obviously. So it does work, and there's obviously a great deal of support from the Inns. So that Laura, sorry.
Interesting tidbit is that Paul did also actually interview me at one point, but he won't remember this. My advice would be:
was I nice or horrible?
It was a tough interview, but it was certainly a good experience. I think I got through to the second round, so wasn't too bad. So my experience would be, generally a lot of people that interview for crime sort of forget that a lot of criminal practitioners also do something else as well. So for example, at my chambers, we do majority crime, but we've also got a very strong immigration team. We've got a very strong regulatory team. And my bit of advice is, if you are going to a chambers that does have another practice area that interests you, make sure you know a bit about that as well. Particularly in crime, you may well get asked about legal aid cuts, how you would cope with that. And I think it's a very sensible answer to say, look, crime is the area that I'm passionate about, but I would love to complement it with some immigration work or something like that. Second piece of advice I would give: practice bail applications, practice plea and mitigations. If they're not in the first round, they will be in the second round. I mean, I think I'd put money on the fact that a criminal chambers is not going to have one of those in either round. Final point, picking up on what Paul said, practice as much as you can. Recently, what I've noticed is the powers of LinkedIn are absolutely amazing. I know I offer interviews every year. I know Ruth is really active. I know Sahar is really active. So do as much interview prep as possible, and you really will notice, just having a go, how much better you do become. Even if it's just your mates, even if you just say to your friends, look, for the next 10 minutes, can you just ask me questions and tell me how I come across? It really will make a difference. Don't rock up to your first ever pupillage interview having never had a go, would be my advice.
All right, again, reiterate all the points that everybody's made. Again, from a criminal perspective, as Laura said, you're likely to have a bail application or a plea mitigation. Also, again, like Vinesh said, know the hot topics, recent cases in criminal law. I know a big one for this year has been modern slavery. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Look it up. It's relevant to the criminal law, and it's a recent development, and it's something that a lot of chambers are asking about, if not on your application, at your interview. Know the sentencing guidelines as well. Beyond just practicing plea mitigations, you need to be able to navigate the sentencing guidelines. What are mandatory minimum sentences? Knife crime is a huge thing at the moment. If you are convicted of a second knife offence, there's a mandatory minimum sentence. So know things like that. the third strike rule for domestic burglary and things along those lines as well. Just really familiarise yourself with the Sentencing Council website and the various sentencing guidelines. Knowledge is a huge thing to balance with preparation. And so if you are well versed in the different types of sentencing guidelines, the different sentencing outcomes, and the recent cases, you'll do a lot better if you are given maybe an argument, a point for and against. And often I believe now, especially on with it being virtual interviews, you'll be given the exercise just a little bit before. We're all sat at our laptops, so you have resources at your fingertips to be able to quickly turn to. But if you've already practiced and prepared, you will easily find what you need to deal with whatever advocacy exercise or argument you're given.
Can I just add something, Saha, on that? Because that made me think of something that, the thing to remember is that we have probably gone through 350 applications. The applicant's done amazingly well to get to interview. There's not much between people on the whole. Sometimes one year you get a stellar applicant, he's going to get the first spot, like in our example. But as well as practice, which is key, practice your interview skills. People want to know what you're really like. So I know it's a mixed message, but also be yourself. And remember that the panel aren't, if it's a good chambers, they're not trying to catch you out or make you fail. They want you to succeed, because we've got a difficult decision to make. We want to know what you're really like. And if you're, be yourself.
Just to kind of wrap it up, there's a couple of general points which I'd like to throw out there for general discussion before we totally sign off. They've been hinted at, but one thing which people often ask me, and Francis, I'll look to you first, if I may, is a commitment to the geography. So people sometimes ask me, well, I'm applying to a set in Leeds, but I don't live in Leeds, I live in London. They're interviewing me, so is that really going to be important? Is that an issue?
Yes, I think a lot of sets outside of London do ask questions about commitment to the geography, because I think there's a concern that someone will go do pupillage just because they're looking for any pupillage and then leave and go elsewhere. I don't think it's the deciding factor. I've never come across it being the deciding factor between two candidates. Well, this one has a Yorkshire connection and this one doesn't. But I think there's sometimes a bit of an anxiety, which I think is probably overblown, really, because the reality is, if it's not the right fit for pupil and chambers, it isn't going to work. And if it is, the likelihood is that you'll have yourself a tenant for the long term, I think.
Incidentally, everyone, of course, just feel free to unmute now and chip in as you like. But I'll put this question to James, because he hinted at it as well. In relation to commitment to practice area, how important is that, and how realistic is that for somebody who is at the stage of their career where they're applying for pupillage, to see some kind of commitment to planning, for example?
I'm going to give a kind of slightly contradictory answer. I think it's important, but it's difficult. I think it is difficult. If you may be lucky and be one of those people that really knows what you want to do, but there are a lot of people who aren't in that boat. I think, so speaking openly, we can only find out about people on the basis of what we ask them and what we read and what they say. So you're always able to prepare your application in a smart way that presents yourself in a certain way that looks favourable. I don't think anyone is. I mean, the bar is so competitive that, quite frankly, if you're not interested in the particular area you're applying for, you're never going to thrive anyway, and you're likely to get found out at interview. You might not. So there has to be some alignment between where you're applying and what you're interested in. And I think it would count against you if you expressed a kind of doubt or hesitation about your ability to commit to the field that you're in. But I think having a curiosity is probably at least the minimum. Obviously, the more that's been.
Well, I think
challenge, particularly in areas like mine. Environment, not so much, because environment's quite a kind of topical, attractive subject, but planning is quite niche, so it can be challenging for people to demonstrate that.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And finally, throwing this out more generally, if we've talked about geography and we've talked about practice area, what about the set? Because a number, or I should say the provider, given that I'm an employed barrister, a number of people say to me and they ask me, well, you know, I can demonstrate that I'm committed to pupillage in London or Wales or wherever it is. I can demonstrate because I've been paralegaling in this area, or I've been doing work in this area, all my marshalling is in this area. But what about the set? Because when it comes down to it, how do I answer a question from a panel, why us, beyond saying, well, you're in the space that I want to work in, and you're in the geography I want to work in, and yes, you're involved in some of the best cases, but so is their competitor set, and they know that, so I can't, you know, what's the answer there?
Can I just start perhaps, because I get that question asked quite a lot with some of the work that I do with my IN on their Pupillage Foundation scheme and other things. And I have like top tips for things which I think is best for applicants to do before they apply. So with my chambers, my previous chambers that I got pupillage and subsequently tenancy in, I was lucky enough to have had encounters with barristers from that set for different things. One thing, I'd had a mini pupillage set up for there. I was volunteering at the Barbara Brenner unit and managed to get a case allocated to a barrister in that chambers by communicating with their clerks. So in my application form, I could compliment the clerks and say that I love this place because you do lots of pro bono work, blah, blah, blah. And other tips that I've been giving people. Oh yeah, also somebody from that university was alumni, and I met him at an alumni event of mine, and I went to the University of Reading. So, you know, that's a bit of a rarer thing than to go to an alumni Oxford or Cambridge event and see loads of barristers. So I could put that in there as well. Another tip I've given people is try to go to seminars, I think, because lots of chambers organise seminars. And sometimes they don't necessarily ask, you know, or stipulate that you must be a solicitor or a barrister to go. So if you can go, then and you can see the barristers in that chamber speaking, then that's a good tip to put in the application form, to be like, yes, I saw him speak, he's very persuasive, very interesting, blah, blah, blah. So those are my sort of top tips to get the edge as compared to other candidates who would just be saying, oh, well, I like this chambers because of everything that I've seen on your website.
That's really, really good advice. And I guess, I mean, I didn't have any contacts in the bar when I joined. I didn't really know anyone. I'd done a mini pupillage in the chambers that I'm still at now, and that always helps. Don't be shy is what I would say. You know, I don't want to open up the floodgates necessarily, but I get lots of, I'm sure everyone on this video chat gets a lot of approaches and so on from people almost out of the blue. And quite frankly, I don't mind that. I quite admire it, to be honest, because if you don't have pre-made contacts, what else can you do? And I've got a lot of respect for people that have the willingness to just text, you know, send a message on LinkedIn or email or drop a letter or something and say, I'm really interested in, can I meet you for a coffee, or could I have a call with you to discuss or something? I don't mind that at all. And, you know, there are so many barriers to entry or perceived barriers to entry. And I think often people think that the profession is going to be unfriendly. And in my experience, it's not actually. There's a lot of willingness to help people and support people and to open up. And I would say to people who are watching, just don't be shy. If you need to make contacts or need to find out information, approach people. Do it in a respectful way and in an appropriate way and so on, but don't be shy about doing it.
Can I just jump in there and echo what James said? You know, people that are willing to give help, there are an abundance of us out there. But as he said, do be respectful when you are messaging people on LinkedIn. Use their correct name as well. I mean, I've had messages from people saying, "Hi, Emily, will you review my CV?" And I'm thinking, not only are you bluntly asking me to give up my time, which is great, and I can tell you that I've got a CV I'm reviewing tomorrow, for example, because somebody did that. But I think get our names right. Imagine you're writing an email, because LinkedIn can often become a bit too informal. But I think if you treat it as though it is someone's professional environment, which it is, you're much more likely to get a response. And you're much more likely to get a response if you've actually thought about the advice that you're asking for. I wouldn't go on a fishing expedition and just say, can you do X, Y, and Z for me? You know, I would maybe say something like, I see you work at this Chambers, that's an area that I'm interested in. I wondered if you could possibly help. Just I think being respectful, you're much more likely to get a response and not alienate yourself. And then again, going back to something which I said earlier, which I think is really important when talking about commitment to a Chambers, look at the other areas of practice that Chambers do. I know I've already said it, but if we are mainly a criminal set, but you also like something else that we do, that gives you a bit of an edge. You know, you don't have to tie yourself, I'm going to be, you know, in the Crown Court every single day for the rest of my life. You know, you could say something like, whilst I don't have any experience in licensing law, it is something that potentially, you know, I might be interested in, and it shows, you know, that you might be more flexible, particularly as a pupil. You can get involved in various different areas.
I can jump in. I'll give an example of what not to do. When I had an interview once, I went to some obscure place. I'd driven hours. I'd actually had an interview in London the night before. I think I was still living in Birmingham at the time, and then I drove for hours to somewhere, I believe it was in maybe Leicestershire. And in terms of my way to align with them, I'm from Sheffield, so I could say, you know, I'd like to practice kind of, you know, around the Midlands, the northern regions. But in terms of what I could say about them, I had nothing. Their website was under construction when I applied. It was still under construction by the time I went to interview. And so I was really at a loss with much information other than to say, you know, I asked around and people said you were a good set. And that was literally it. Needless to say, I didn't get invited back. I didn't get pupillage there, but we do have a lot of chambers that have websites now. You can find a lot of information, really go through it, look at some of maybe the individuals. It might not be a chamber's initiative to support a particular charity, but there might be individuals in there that support particular charities or particular organizations that you align with, or maybe you have ever volunteered with. Also, Barley, however you pronounce it, has, you know, recent cases. You can look at who's been involved in those cases, because again, it might not necessarily be on Chambers' website. XYZ was involved in this recent case. A lot of chambers have Twitter accounts now as well, and LinkedIn. So there's a lot of sources of information where you can get beyond the you know, generic, I like your chambers, you're involved in some high profile cases, you've got a number of QCs and a number of high level juniors. You can go beyond that and to say, well, actually, I note that this particular person was involved in this case, and this person has, you know, founded this charity, and like Natasha and everybody has said, go to events if you can. You can even go to court if you're interested, you know, in certain types of areas of law. I know maybe not so easily for family law, but for criminal law, it's public galleries. You can go into them and you can watch cases. And if you use your judgment and can find an opportune time, I'm sure barristers will be happy to chat with you and give you a bit of information about what they're dealing with on the day.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think I'd like to echo James's point that most of 99.9% of the profession are just so willing to help. And I love help. And you know, the bar. So just if there's a chambers in your, just email the senior clerk and say, it can give me a mock interview, or go through your ins, and you'll find that most people will.
Yeah, that's definitely true. There's a lot of willingness to help out there, and this call is clearly a demonstration of that fact. One thing which just occurs to me from what Ruth said there when she was talking about that set of chambers she interviewed at. I don't want to labour the point because I certainly spend a lot of time talking about it online, but every one of us will have experienced projection. It's part of the process, and it's part of being a barrister, it's part of life. And you have to take the rough with the smooth. Yes, it hurts. There are points at which you think maybe this isn't for you, maybe this isn't going to work, but that tenacity, that drive, that willingness to keep going is often what will differentiate you. So don't lose too much heart from that. On that note, I'm going to thank all of you so much for being so generous with your time, particularly when I've been late myself in setting these things up sometimes. Thank you to Francis for recording all of this as well. I think...
Don't thank me just yet till you've actually seen the, the recording.
I'm really hopeful that the resource we've created here is going to be useful for those who watch it. It can't ever be something that is or that speaks to every single person for every situation, but I think across the various parts that we've put together, we will have created something which serves the purpose for which we have all given up our time today and this evening, which is because we believe in the collegiality of the bar and in that giving back. So I thank you on behalf of everyone who comes to watch this, and I thank you personally as well. Thank you so much.